Shalom, shalom. This is Brother Uriah from the Hebrew Israelite Home Bible Study Group here in Pensacola, Florida. Tonight's topic is going to be the Hebrew Israelite Biblical Lunar Solar Calendar versus the Roman Julian calendar. Let's get started. As always, we're going to begin this lesson with the reading of scriptures. And because I'm trying to emphasize this point, we're going to be reading Hosea 4 and 6 again, which reads, "My people are destroyed for lack of knowledge. Because thou hast rejected knowledge, I will also reject thee, that thou shalt be no priest to me, seeing thou hast forgotten the law of thy Elohim. I will also forget thy children." Tonight, we're going to be taking a look at the biblical lunar solar calendar versus the Roman Julian calendar. We're going to be seeing that this Roman Julian calendar actually began with an 8-day week. We're going to see that there were two calendars in use at the time of the Messiah: the Roman Julian calendar and the lunar solar calendar. Which one do you think that the apostles used? Which one do you think that the Messiah used? Let's get started. Now, in review, we remember that last time we were looking at the Roman Gregorian calendar, which came out in October 15th, 1582, under the authorization of Pope Gregory, the Roman Catholic Pope. So we're going to be, and we moved backwards in time in that lesson, where we saw that calendar was based upon an earlier Roman Julian calendar with its planetary days as the days of the week. Here we saw the images of 7 individuals, 5 men, 2 women. They were Saturn, Jupiter, Mars, Sol, Venus, Mercury, and Luna. And we saw that Saturn was the first day of the week, and Luna was the 7th day of the week, showing us that the idea by some Hebrew Israelites who believe that the seventh day Saturday has been in that position throughout time, so that we could find the seventh day going back continuously all the way back to creation week. And this analysis shows that that's totally false. That's totally false. It did not follow back continuously. So tonight we're going to go back even a little further in time. We're going to be going back all the way to the beginning of this Julian calendar. And we're going to see that Julian calendar at its very beginning, which came out in 45 BC, actually at one point had an 8-day week. Again, showing that it's totally impossible for a Sabbath to have gone back continuously, uninterrupted, all the way back to creation week. That's totally impossible, and this analysis and data shows that that is totally impossible and needs to be dropped. Here we're going to be looking at the timeline going from the beginnings of Rome to the birth of the Messiah. We're going to be starting in the year 753 BC. 753 BC. 753 years roughly before the birth of the Messiah. So in that year 753, Rome is founded. Rome is founded by Romulus. Romulus was one of the first of the seven Roman kings. The original name of Rome was Roma. 509 BC, Rome becomes a republic. And in 218 BC, Hannibal invades Italy. Hannibal leads the Carthage army to attack Italy. This becomes part of the Second Punic War. Now in 45 BC, Julius Caesar becomes the first dictator of Rome. Julius Caesar defeats Pompey in a civil war. He becomes the supreme ruler of Rome. This is the end of the Roman Republic. He hires a man by the name of Sosigenes of Alexandria, Egypt, who was a Greek astronomer from the Ptolemaic period, to work out a new 12-month calendar called the Julian calendar. This calendar initially had an 8-day week. That's right, 8 days to the week. So in 44 BC, Julius Caesar is assassinated. 27 BC, the Roman Empire begins. And roughly somewhere between 3 and 5 BC, most believe to be 4 BC, Yahushua HaMashiach, aka Jesus, is born in a little town called Bethlehem in Judea, part of the Roman Empire. Now around 30 to 33 AD, Yahushua HaMashiach is crucified. Yahushua is killed in Jerusalem, Judea, fulfilling the prophecy of Isaiah 53. And by the way, the AD in that date stands for Anno Domini, which means the year of the Lord, not after death. Anno Domini, the year of the Lord. So in 64 AD, much of Rome is burned by Nero. You know that crazy fool Nero, that Emperor Nero. And then in 70 AD, Vespasian and Titus destroy Jerusalem. An estimated 1 million Hebrew Israelites are taken into slavery and dispersed throughout the Roman Empire. Many more flee deeper into Africa. 80 AD, that famous Colosseum that we have all seen pictures of in Italy was built. Then in 122 BC, the Hadrian Wall is built. The Hadrian Wall. It kind of reminds me of Donald Trump and his wall that he wants to keep the people south of us out of the United States. Kind of reminds me of that. 306 AD, Emperor Constantine of Rome becomes the emperor in 306 AD. Rome becomes a quote-unquote Christian empire. By 380, Christianity is established. But this Christianity, as most of us Hebrew Israelites know, is very distinct from the original teachings of the Christ and the followers of the Christ that were called Christians first in Antioch. 395, Rome splits into two empires, the Western Roman Empire and the Eastern Roman Empire. And then in 410, the Visigoths sack Rome. This is the first time in 800 years that the city of Rome has fallen to an enemy. Here we are at the last part of the timeline to the current date. In 1582 AD, Pope Gregory releases the Gregorian calendar in Europe. Initially, only 4 European nations used this calendar. Later, all of them would join in with this Gregorian calendar, finally leaving the older Roman Julian calendar for this Roman Gregorian calendar. Still Roman, still pagan. Now, this calendar came to the so-called colonies of the so-called New World, America, in 1620. So the calendar that everyone is using, it wasn't even in this country until 1620. Now, jumping up to 1611. Now, this is the year that King James released the King James version of the Bible. All right, at that time, the King James consisted of 80 books. Today, it only has 66. What happened to those other 14 books? They took them out. They took those other scriptures out. Why did they take them out? Well, that's a subject for another lesson, but they took them out because of protests by certain Protestants that found certain things in them offensive. And these are the books which we know of as the Apocrypha, the books of the Apocrypha. Now, jumping to 1619, we come to a very important date. 1619 is the official date for the first transatlantic slave ship which arrived at Port Comfort in Virginia, August 20th, 1619. Now, it should be understood, this was not the first slave ship to arrive in the Americas. It simply was not. But this is the official date that America recognizes. It is the date that even Donald Trump recognizes and uses, because remember, he signed off on what's it called, HR 1242, that recognizes the 400-year anniversary of the slaves, which the document says Africans, but they weren't Africans, they were Hebrew Israelites coming into this country. Now, this is important because when you're using the pagan, Roman, Gregorian calendar, and it's January 1st date as the beginning of the 400th year, you're automatically going to fall into error. Again, as I've tried to explain, you cannot use that pagan calendar for biblical purposes. Why? Because the biblical calendar, according to the biblical calendar, the new year begins in the spring, which would take us into March 20th of the current calendar, not January 1st, March 20th. So many Hebrew Israelites believe that we've entered into the 400th year of our captivity in the Americas. No, actually, it hasn't even started yet. It would correspond with March 20th of this year. Next, we come down into where we are today, 2019, and at the time of this video, the U.S. government is in partial shutdown by Donald Trump because he's upset that he's not getting his money to build the wall to keep the Mexicans out of this land, much of which used to belong to them anyway, until these people came over here from Europe and stole it. All right, so one of the consequences of this, 38 million Americans, our food source is cut off, or the threat thereof. But again, as of this recording, they've come to a 3-week agreement. That means they're going to open up the government for 3 weeks, and if he doesn't get his money by then, presumably the government will be shut down again, and the people will be cut off again. Now this also tells you, you can't trust these heathens. You can't trust them. That's why the scripture tells us to come ye out from among them and be ye separate. He's already separated his chosen people. Now we truly have to separate, because at some point destruction is going to fall. And as I believe, the Mystery Babylon is going to be biting the dust not too long from now. But that's another subject. Let's move on. Here we have the 8-day Roman Julian calendar that was in use at the time of the Messiah. At the time the Messiah was born, and he grew up to be a man, and all through the time when he up until when he died on the cross, this was the calendar that was in use at that time by Rome. Now we're going to talk more about this calendar in the next slide, but I want you to get a fuller picture here, and then we're going to talk about it in a little bit more detail a little bit later. But here, just notice across the top, you have the days of the month. Realize that these are Latin letters, Latin words. So where we would say May, M-A-Y, this is M-A-I. Where we would say June, J-U-N, this, remember this is before the letter J had even been invented. But it's at the time of Jesus. Again, showing that his name couldn't have possibly been literally Jesus. There are no J's in the Hebrew Israelite. We all know that. But here we see another example of that, because here we are in what we would call June, but it's spelled I-V, which used to be I-V-N, which used to be, the V was synonymous with U. Double U. Okay? And then we go to the QVI and SEX and the SEP and October and November, December, and the adjustment period called the intercalary month that came occasionally. Now we're going to take a closer look at this in a minute. Let's move on. Here we're going to take a look at the top part of that 8-day Roman Julian calendar that was in use at the time of the Messiah and the apostles. Okay, so let's take a look at this. We see they're reading from left to right, starting at the top. You can see the names of the month, January through December, in Latin. And then to the far right, you see the INTER. This stands for intercalation month. That's that month that occasionally is used to make the necessary adjustments to try to keep the months coordinated with the seasons of the year. Now, reading from top but going down is a column of letters A through H. Each letter is a day of the week, and after H, it just simply repeats again, A through H. Now, looking up there, we can see this very clearly. A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, and then the next letter below it is A again. Now, there's a letter to the right side of these letters. These were used for indication of what was permissible to do during those days. Now, strange enough as it may seem, what things one could do, such as commerce, what type of commerce was controlled. And this second column of letters told what could be done on those days. Now, this is the calendar that the Romans were using at the time of Jesus or Yahusha. 8 days to the week. Again, think about this. Again, making it impossible for there to have been a continuous, uninterrupted 7-day weekly cycle going back to creation week. It's totally impossible. Why? Because here we find that the same calendar, the calendar that we use today, based upon the 7-day Julian planetary week, which was based upon this 8-day Julian calendar, would make that totally impossible. There's absolutely no way that Torah following Hebrew Israelites would have kept a 7-day weekly Sabbath using an 8-day weekly pagan calendar. There's no way possible. Let's move on. Now we're looking at the bottom of that Julian calendar from which the modern calendar is based. We see the columns with the days of the week, A, B, C, D, E, and E, and then it's going to go back to the top of the next column where we'll find the rest of the week, F, G, and ending in H. Then the next week begins all over again with A. Now, looking at the bottom, along the bottom, we see the letters XXIX, XXIX, which is Latin. Remember, these are Latin letters, Latin words, which we would call and Roman numerals. So this XXIX, which is Latin for 29, indicating that there are 29 days in that month of January. Next is XXIX, again indicating 29 days in February. Then XXXI, indicating March has 31 days in the month. Again, it is impossible to determine the feast days such as Day of Atonement, Feast of Tabernacles, etc., including the Shabbat, by this 8-day weekly calendar. Yahusha did not use it. The apostles did not use it. Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob didn't use it because, in part, it didn't even exist back at their time. What did they use? What they used was the Lunar Solar Calendar with the 2 great lights, which we talked about earlier. This calendar doesn't use 2 great lights. All right, it's non-biblical. Again, proving you can't use this calendar. You just can't do it. Saturday is not the Sabbath. Let's move on. Now, this is a bit of an aside. Here's some FYI additional information. Do you remember earlier in this lesson, I showed in the timeline that Rome was founded in 753, I believe it was, BC. by Romulus. Well, the question could be asked, well, who the heck is Romulus? Well, look at this picture. See them two little boys down there? See them two little boys? What are they doing? They're sucking on the tit of this image of a wolf. That's what that is. Those are two little boys feeding from the tit of this female wolf. Those two little boys are Romulus and Remus. These are your founders of Rome. Two little boys raised by a wolf, sucking the breast milk out of a dog. According to our scriptures, the dog is an unclean animal. You're not supposed to eat them, and you're sure as hell not supposed to feed the milk of the wolf to your babies. But here we see that these heathens have depicted this reality of theirs. All right? Romulus and Remus, the founders of Rome. So when you see Rome and think of Rome, and you think of this Roman Julian calendar, you think of this Roman Gregorian calendar, that's what this is all based upon. Pure paganism. Pure paganism. And we're gonna see a little close up these two little heathens down there sucking off the tit of this dog. Okay, here we have a close-up of these two little heathens, Romulus and Remus, the twin brothers, the founders of Rome, right? Sucking the milk from this wolf, this she-wolf, that their mythology says raised these two little boys. Don't know where their real mama and daddies are, but they're sitting here sucking the breast milk out of this dog, this wolf. Now, this is the basis of Rome. These are the founders of Rome. It's from these people, these descendants of Japheth. Remember that? Remember Genesis chapter 10, verses 1 through 5? Japheth and his son Gomer and Ashkenaz and Meshach and all these little heathens, all these people who are identified by the scriptures as the original Gentiles. Wasn't one of them named Javan? You know, this is where we get this stuff from. Those Gentiles. These are the ones who have given you that Roman Catholic Gregorian calendar. Think about that. Here I'm showing all three calendar systems together. At the top left, we have the Roman Julian calendar that came into existence in 45 BC. Recall that it has an 8-day week designated A through H. To the right of that, we have the Roman Julian 7-day planetary calendar. All right, now we haven't seen this one before in its entirety. But again, this one we have those 7 gods across the top, going from left to right. There's Saturn, and then next to that is Sol. Remember, see the rays of the sun. Now remember that I said that over the years, over the centuries, these people moved around days of the week, like we saw that they moved around months. So remember when we saw earlier that Sol was in the fourth position. Sol, the sun, was in the 4th day position. Now Sol is in the 2nd day position. Next to Sol is Luna. Look at the horns on the head. Those are the crescent moons. That's Luna. Remember, Luna used to be in the 7th position. Next to her is Mars, the god of war. Next to him is Mercury, the messenger god. Next to him is Jupiter, and then next to him is Venus. Now, in the other calendar that we saw, the other representation, Venus wasn't even on there, right? Venus was not even there, but now she's there, showing you again that these days have been moved around throughout this Julian calendar throughout those centuries. They didn't all stay static in one position. And again, showing you that it was totally impossible that we can say that the day Saturday, the seventh day of the week, has been the seventh day of the week continuously and uninterrupted all the way back to the 7-day creation week. It's just not true. And Hebrew Israelites got to come to the understanding of this. The fact, it's not true. Here we see Saturn in the first position on this representation of the Julian calendar. And we're going to see another reason in a minute here, even regarding the modern calendar. Again, disproving this idea that Saturday is the seventh day of the week and always has been, and all that you have to do is keep going back 7 days, another 7 days, another 7 days, all the way back to the creation week. That's totally false. Now, when we look down, let's look at this Julian calendar with the 7-day week some more. If we look down the left-hand side, we'll see the Roman numerals 1 through 15. We look on the right-hand side, we'll see the Roman numerals 16 through 30, indicating the days of the week. So what they did was they had a little peg, and they would put this peg in the little hole, which is represented here by a little black circle, to indicate what day of the week it is. On the first day of the week, next day you move it to the second position. Next day, third position, and so on and so on. Now they also had a peg for the name day of the week, and I'm sure I said that wrong, that 1 through 30 was the days of the month, not the days of the weeks. Now the days of the weeks, those are the representations of these 7 figures at the top. They would keep a peg there to indicate, well, today is Saturday, or Sol Day, or Lunar Day, and so on. Now if we look in that circle, we'll see 12 animals. And notice that they have pegs that holes where pegs can be placed in them. Now look on there, you'll see that T, and look, and you'll see the Taurus, the bull, Aries, the lamb, P for Pisces, the 2 fish. Followed on around, going clockwise, you'll see Sagittarius, and Scorpio, and Libra, all the way around, and you see some more K for the crab, and you see the 2 twins, and that's Virgo. That's that astrology nonsense, that horoscope pagan nonsense. Don't lose sight of the fact that these are all Roman Julian calendars, and from this Julian calendar, the Roman Catholic Church gave us the Roman Gregorian calendar. Now, I want you to notice something, because we didn't mention this before, but the day that the astronomer who was given charge of developing this newer calendar gave it to Pope Gregory, it was October 4th, 1582. Now, when it became official, which was the very next day, you would think it would be October 5th, 1582, but it wasn't. It was deemed to be October 15th, 1582, which means that they skipped over 10 whole days. Again, showing you that it would be impossible to keep counting back 7 days, another 7 days, and another 7 days, all the way back to creation week. Why? Because these heathens dropped 10 whole days. Very few people understand this, but this is fact. That's why we have these lessons. To learn something new. My people are destroyed for a what? Lack of knowledge. That's why we have these lessons. 10 whole days were dropped off. So when you see these other videos out here and they don't tell you this, they don't take this into account. They want to tell you about all this other nonsense, but not these facts about these calendars. However many videos they are, however erudite sounding they may be, they're wrong because they're not taking this into account. Common sense tells you that if you drop 10 days off the calendar, which they did, you cannot possibly keep counting 7 days, 7 days, 7 days back to creation week. And then you run into the problem that you got where the week consisted of 8 days and not 7. And this is what our modern Gregorian calendar is based upon. Now, ask yourself a very simple question. Which one of these calendar systems do you think Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob used? Which one of these calendar systems do you think the Messiah would use? Which one of these calendar systems do you think the apostles used? And the answer is none of them. So that tells us that for our use, for biblical purposes, you cannot use these calendars. Now, in conclusion, we have taken a good look at both the modern Gregorian calendar and the earlier 7-day Julian calendar from which it is based. Both are clearly pagan and idolatrous. Under no circumstances would Father Yah have directed his chosen ones to determine and keep the Sabbaths and feast days by these calendars. Then we turn to the even earlier Roman Julian calendar, which had an 8-day week. How could anyone keep the 7th-day Sabbath based on an 8-day week? We are told the week is 6 days of work followed by a 7th day of rest. Holy Yah numbered his days of his week. He did not give them names of pagan gods and goddesses, nor did he give them names using the alphabet of a pagan, heathen, Gentile society called Rome, whose founding fathers were raised by a she-wolf. In the next lesson, we will turn our attention to the lunar solar calendars that was used throughout scriptures. The one that uses 2 great lights, the sun and the moon. So to all of you, I say again, shalom, shalom. And according to the lunar solar calendar, today is the Sabbath. So I say to you, Shabbat shalom, Israel.